I have to tell you, what a great day to be a Florida Gator fan because Scott Stricklin just announced that Billy Napier is being going to be kept for another season at Florida. And for those of you who don't know, I've covered Florida extensively over the past couple seasons, and I watch a ton of Florida football, and if you watch other, kind of mainstream analysts, they're going to tell you it's dumb. They're going to tell you it's stupid. They're going to tell you that they should have canned them, whatever. But I'm here to tell you, as someone who follows Florida football, as somebody who understands the X's and O's of this program, I'm here to tell you that keeping Billy Napier for another season is the right decision for a number of different reasons. And you know, on this show, I'll be the first one to tell you I've been fairly critical of Billy Napier for a number of reasons. I mean, I think first and foremost the play calling this year has been questionable at certain times. Sometimes it tends to be a little bit too conservative. I think a lot of the time it's just not as creative as you would like it to be. Also, additionally, the recruiting has also not been there in the way that it has been in years past, which I'm going to get into a little bit. And most importantly too, I mean, the results are just simply not on the field. But like I said before, I'll get into the reasons why. Obviously there various arguments for why that could be happening, but overall, to me, this seems like a step in the right direction, because in Scott Strickland's statement, one of the things that he addressed was, hey, we're really trying to bring some stability into this program, something that we haven't seen in a long time. I mean, I mean, if you want to go down memory lane, I mean, you can think of, I think of Ron Zook, who was there for 3 seasons, but obviously, with the roster that he had, I mean, anybody should have been able to win with that roster, and somehow he didn't get it done. So you think of Ron Zook, you think of Jim McElwain, you think of Dan Mullen, and in this example too, obviously, Billy Napier could have been a 3 or 4 seasons and done. So when you have that sort of history, and you have the prestige of the Florida Gators, push comes to shove, and it's just one of those things where you know I do think it is the right decision for him to be back. And if we're going to talk about purely on the football field, I mean, you know, I saw a lot of heart and a lot of fight in this team against Georgia. I just did an episode, a couple days ago regarding that game, and what you can say whatever you want about the recruiting. Obviously, that's not ideal. My stat is, I believe, 50th recruiting class according to 24/7 Sports, and 39th recruiting class according to ESPN. Now, obviously, that needs to be top 10 across the board, in my opinion. If you really want to ramp this up, you have to at least have a top 10 recruiting class, and also according to Saturday Night Down with who covers Florida Gators, yeah, Saturday Down South. That's a freaking name. I couldn't think of it. They're talking about investing somewhere between 10 and 13 million dollars into NIL. And imagine if you really did have to pay that $26.5 million. So instead of having to go to your gate, and instead of having to go to your collective and say, hey, we're gonna round up 26, $27 million, can Billy Napier, and then go around and who are you gonna get? That's my point. Because let's think about it. I've said before that I don't want anything to do with Lane Kiffin. And the reason I don't want anything to do with Lane Kiffin is he hasn't shown that he has a championship pedigree. When you watch games like Arkansas, you sit there and say to yourself, man, how freaking awesome would that be, seeing Florida, being able to being that electric? Yes, that's there. But when you think about his stints at USC, you think about Tennessee, and and all those different programs, it just push comes to shove eventually. So I personally am glad that they're staying away from that too. And also, when Ole Miss pays them all that money, and the results aren't there, quite frankly, that's just something that is probably for the best too. So you would have to go and fire Billy for 26, and then you'd probably have to pay Lane Kiffin $100 million for him to come there. So it's like when you think about that, I'm like, okay, would I rather have one more season and possibly save my recruiting, because the whole reason why Florida is even this low right now, granted, yes, I will be the first one to tell you they lost a number of really talented recruits, towards the beginning of the season that kind of got poached by them. But the main reason for this announcement, and some people are going to sit there and say, well, why would you announce that as soon as they're going to get their ass beat by Texas? Well, it's saving face on the recruiting front. That's exactly what it is. Because the reason why that their recruiting class, statistically speaking, isn't looking the way that it is because every recruit, rightfully so, is sitting there saying to themselves, okay, if I commit to Florida this year, who's going to be my head coach there? Who's going to be, is Billy going to be really calling plays? What about Austin Armstrong and Ron Roberts? Like, what's that situation going on? Because they have that, co-coordinator thing going on, which, by the way, their defense also has played a hell of a lot better too. But in terms of, the grand scheme, Billy Napier, I mentioned the recruiting class, and if you want to talk about even just the past couple seasons in terms of recruiting, he ranked 32nd in year 1, 12th in year 2, and 10th year 3. So I mean, it is going in the right direction if you're talking about statistically. And they really do have a young team. I mean, I think of Jaden Bowe, the running back behind Montreal Johnson, who's had a lot more playing time with, some of the lingering injuries that he has. I think of Eugene Wilson, sophomore receiver who is definitely is a stud when he's healthy. And then you have a number of talented guys on the defensive line who are clearly contributing early and getting into the quarterback. And yes, there were some slow starts, and yes, they've struggled defensively, particularly, trying to stop the run. But at the same time, when you see it, you see it. And, when you hear Billy Napier and his press conferences, it's the one thing you give him credit for. You can talk about, the results on the field and this, that, or the other, but the reality is that the message is always consistent, and these guys play for him. And when I see these players playing for him, and I see little changes every week, it can't help but feel a little bit more optimistic. And you can go back and watch my other videos. I've always kind of been of the belief that, to some extent, it didn't really make sense for them to fire him right now. Because I'm like, what do you have? Like, because if you fired him, let's say you fired him at the Texas A&M game, like what's the point of firing him? Because that was one of my arguments too. I'm like, what are you gonna do? Go have Ron Roberts coach the team? He coached at Delta State in southeastern Louisiana. Like, that's not going to instill any sort of confidence or belief in your recruiting program too. And you even talked about that before too. I mean, there's some instability in terms of the presidency. There's an interim president there right now. You have Scott Stricklin, who, if he actually were to get another chance hiring a head coach, that would have been his third head coach. And when you're kind of putting this all together, I think, even if you want to think about it just, from logically speaking, I mean, there's a lot riding on Scott Stricklin for this to work out with Billy Napier. So to me, the announcement, the timing of it, all makes sense too. And you can say it's a little bit early, but I think when you put this to rest, and you trust the foundation, the program that you have, everything, hopefully everything will work out too. And I'll be and for those of who don't know, Florida has been behind the 8 ball extensively when it comes to NIL money, the transfer portal, all that stuff, because their logic was pretty much, hey, we're going to upgrade the athletic facilities. We're going to give Billy Napier more money for his staff. And I think all of that is there, and all that's great and everything. Because Austin Armstrong, up until he went to Florida, he was one of the hottest younger assistants in college football. I mean, he was even on Nick Saban's staff for a little bit too, and he really worked his way up quickly too. So it's a testament to how hard he's been working. And also, they definitely have done a serious 180, and that's definitely something to keep your eye on too. But outside of all the logistical elements of it, let's just talk about how difficult his schedule, his strength of schedules have been over the past couple years. And by the way, that's not going to change it. That's not going to change it all going into next year too. They're going to be running through the gauntlet next year too. So when you're thinking to yourself, okay, there's no obvious person to come in whoever comes in is going to have their own recruits. They're going to have their own systems. They're going to have their own staff. And on top of that, you're going to get thrown to the fire of the SEC with one of the toughest schedules in the entire country. Like the more this all unravels, the less it makes sense to me for them to completely fire Napier, do the buyout, and then go out and get a home run hire. Guys, that was my one thing. I'm like, okay, I wouldn't necessarily have an issue if you fired Billy Napier, but if you're firing Billy Napier, you need to bring in an equivalent of an Urban Meyer or somebody of that status that can bring instant credibility to your program. Now, obviously, there's various candidates you go after. I mean, to me, when I think of home run hire, I'm thinking, James Franklin, for example. That could be another, quote unquote home run hire that we're talking about. But yeah, back to strength of schedule. So year one, 2022, ranked 7th in strength of schedule. 2023 ranked 4th, and then this year 7th. I repeat, 7th, 2024 strength of schedule. So when you put all that together, it's like, yes, there have been some times where, I've seriously have watched games and I've questioned the future of Florida football. And, that game versus Miami was absolutely embarrassing. Nothing about that game was working. I mean, the offensive line was not doing enough to help Graham Mertz. And obviously when you have that quarterback controversy with, DJ Lagway, that's always going to add another element to it. But, right now it ultimately is the best thing to come to, for the program moving forward when you have a nucleus of young talent to look forward to. That if you can get another 10 million or so in NIL and really bring in some more immediate impact players that are going to be, taken away from you. And also, you hope that you can bring back the same staff that you did last year. And most importantly, that I'm going to bring up that absolutely needs to happen is whatever money that you have here, you absolutely need to find a way to make sure that Billy Napier must hire an offensive coordinator this year. Because if he is calling plays next year, I think you get a little nervous about him coming back. But in general, my take is I think this is what's best for the long-term vision of Florida Gator football. And I'm definitely excited to see how Florida is going to perform for the rest of the season. And most importantly, how are they going to make the most of, hopefully having more NIL money. And I'm also curious about how Billy Napier tweaks his staff, particularly on the offensive line, and he does commit to bringing a legitimate offensive coordinator.